An unlikely deity. Let us say that Dawkins is quite right. God is improbable. The proposition is on the table. It is up for grabs. What then follows? Oddly enough, almost nothing. I say oddly enough because the thesis that God's existence is improbable is the cornerstone of Dawkins' argument, and so an easement to his atheism. But atheists have traditionally been concerned not to push too vigorously on their own suspicions by presenting them in a way that owes too much to probability. The stuff, probability, is notoriously unstable. The inference that Dawkins proposes to champion has its premise the claim that God is improbable. Its conclusion is that likely God does not exist. The inferential bridge invoked by the 747 gambit, if it goes anywhere at all, goes from what God is, he is unlikely, to whether he exists, it would appear not. The inferences of this sort are typically not deductive. They do not impart certainty to their conclusions. A deductive inference carries a conviction straight on down. All men are mortal. Premise 1. Socrates is a man. Premise 2. The conclusion, Socrates is mortal. Given the premise, the conclusion is incontestable. The attempt to shoehorn inferences hinging on likelihood into deductive forms ends in disaster. An example, judging by how Emile writes, it is likely that his native language is German. Premise 1. Judging by where Emile lives, it is likely that his native language is English. Premise 2. Whatever conclusions may be drawn from the circumstances of Emile's prose and his residence, they are not deductive. Otherwise, the result would be a contradiction. Emile, afflicted with at least 2 native languages, and possibly more, it may well be, I am supposing, that certain considerations make God's existence unlikely. Other considerations might make his existence likely. If both considerations are deductively controlling, the result is a form of logical chaos. The inference Dawkins champions cannot prove anything about God's existence. If it cannot prove anything about God's existence, it cannot come close to proving anything either. There is next the explosion that results when improbability and existence are foolishly mingled. In this regard, it is curious that having declared God's existence unlikely in the virtue of his improbability, Dawkins never once considers that by parity of reasoning, he could well have concluded that the existence of the universe is unlikely in virtue of its improbability. Unlikely is unlikely. As logicians say, never adding, of course, that the universe is unlikely, there is the slightest reason to suppose that it does not exist. Nonetheless, the assumptions that the universe is improbable is the gravamen of the 747 gambit. It is indispensable. The fact is that unlikely events do occur. They simply do not occur often. It is difficult, the Bible recounts, for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven as it is for him to pass through the eye of a needle. If it is that difficult, I suppose that it is improbable, and yet some rich men manage. I might, by this reasoning, at least anticipate meeting King Farouk in the hereafter, where, having squeezed himself through the eye of the needle, he may be found enjoying the celestial gaming tables. It could happen. As quantum theorists never tire of reminding us, what could happen sooner or later will happen. What holds for Farouk might well hold for the deity. Having brought the universe into existence, he might simply be probable. It is just one of those things for which we have no further explanation. This is not a conclusion that the soul on fire to know God will necessarily find discouraging, but if we find no further explanation for the existence of the deity, we nonetheless do by this means have an explanation for the existence of the universe. It is this: in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth.